Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. We're now 40 days away from Election Day, and President Trump is refusing to commit to a central tenet of American democracy, peacefully conceding power should he lose. Despite making law and order a central part of his campaign, the president is casting doubt on legal forms of voting that he doesn't find legitimate. Here's what he said as he left the White House this afternoon.
Mr. President, are the election results only legitimate if you win?
So we have to be very careful with the ballots. The ballots, that's a whole big scam. You know, they found, I understand, 8 ballots in a waste paper basket in some location. They found, it was reported in one of the newspapers that they found a lot of ballots in a river. They throw them out if they have the name Trump on it, I guess, but they had ballots.
No names on them.
Okay, well, they still found them in a river, whether they had a name on it or not. But the other ones had the Trump name on it, and they were thrown into a waste paper basket. We want to make sure the election is honest, and I'm not sure that it can be. I don't know that it can be with this whole situation. Unsolicited ballots. They're unsolicited, millions being sent to everybody, and we'll see.
9 states use the type of voting he referenced, places where ballots are mailed directly to all voters. 7 of those 9 are overwhelmingly Democratic. The 8th, Utah, is a deeply Republican state. Only Nevada, worth 6 electoral college votes, is considered a battleground state in this election. That comment comes after the president said this in the briefing room last night.
Will you commit to making sure that there is a peaceful transferal of power after the election?
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots, and the ballots are a disaster.
I understand that, but people are rioting. Do you commit to making sure that there's a peaceful transferal of power?
We want to get rid of the ballots, and we'll have a very peaceful. There won't be a transfer, frankly. There'll be a continuation. The ballots are out of control. You know it. And you know who knows it better than anybody else? The Democrats know it better than anybody else. Go ahead.
Shortly after the 2016 election, President Trump claimed without evidence he would have won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people he said voted illegally. He even appointed a commission to investigate it. The Voter Integrity Commission disbanded after it uncovered no evidence of any such fraud. And the FBI director told senators this morning his agency has never seen a large-scale voter fraud effort by mail or in person.
I have not seen, historically, any kind of coordinated national voter fraud effort in a major election, whether it's by mail or otherwise. We have seen voter fraud at the local level from time to time. To change a federal election outcome by mounting that kind of fraud at scale would be a major challenge for an adversary, but people should make no mistake, we're vigilant as to the threat and watching it carefully because we're in uncharted new territory.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Ed O'Keefe, and Alayna Treene join me now. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent, and Alayna is a White House reporter at Axios. Welcome to you all. Ed, despite what the president says, there is already work underway for a potential transfer of power, correct?
That's right. The Presidential Transition Act passed during the Obama administration with broad bipartisan support actually codifies a few things that have to happen as soon as both parties have a nominee. So in August, essentially, the presidential transition began. This isn't designed to favor one or the other. In fact, it's designed to put them on an equal playing field. And so the federal government has had to provide office space and assistance to the Biden transition team, which they are doing. And the transition, in essence, is underway if it needs to happen. Biden has tapped a series of staffers and well-known Democrats across the country to help advise him on the transition. There's an advisory board run by his good buddy Ted Kaufman, the former senator from Delaware. It includes people like Pete Buttigieg, his former primary rival, and the New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham. But there's also a staff here in Washington that has begun making preparations and will, in earnest, after the election, should Biden win, start diving into resumes and doing background checks and making some early decisions on big cabinet appointments. So, and there's been no dispute or no issue with the Trump administration, which is doing what the law says and providing them with the assistance that they're expected. So the president says one thing. The reality is it is, in essence, underway, and that's part of the reason why that law was passed, was to ensure that no matter what, whether there were prolonged counts in the results, whether one of the candidates suggested they wouldn't necessarily abide by the results, that the federal government, at least at the professional or career level, was making preparations just in case there is a new president next year.
So, Alayna, functionally, what is the difference between accepting a free and fair election and committing to a peaceful transfer of power?
Well, Elaine, I think the key here is what the president means and what his press secretary today means when she said that he will agree to accept the results of a free and fair election. But as we heard from the president later this afternoon when he was getting ready to board Marine One, he said he doesn't think it's going to be honest. And I think the key here is, what if he loses? What will he do in the scenario if it's determined that Joe Biden wins, whether it be on November 3rd or in the weeks after, of course, because there's going to be an incredible influx of mail ballots going to be needing to count. So I think the question here is, how will the president respond? And that's what no one really from the White House or the president has answered. And he's already said he doesn't expect it to be a free and fair election. I think we can very much expect litigation from the president's team, from the re-election campaign's lawyers. And it's going to be something that I think a lot of people, constitutional law experts, election lawyers, have said is potentially going to set up this chaos scenario, a Bush v. Gore scenario on steroids, where, you know, in 2000, Bush v. Gore, it was one state, Florida. This time around, with the pandemic's widespread effect on states all over the country and voters all over the country, there is the potential for litigation and uncertainty in several states. And so I think we need to prepare for that outcome, and we need to prepare that the president, or, you know, and just as fairly, even Vice President Joe Biden, there could be a case where they dispute the election results.
And Caitlin, 2 months ago, you reported on this very topic, on what happens if the president does not accept the election results. What did you find?
Well, first and foremost, it's not up to the president. Constitutional law professors told us that if it is determined that somebody else wins the election, then that person is sworn in on January 20th, and then Trump would become, as constitutional law professor Jonathan Turley, our CBS News contributor, told me, he becomes a guest of the White House, and if he doesn't leave, he becomes an unwanted guest and can be removed by Secret Service. But let's take a step back and just talk about how our elections are conducted and how the results come to be. So we have an electoral college system. Each state tallies up the votes in their state and awards electors based on the popular vote in their state. There are exceptions, of course, in Maine and Nebraska who award proportional delegates. Those electors actually meet on December 14th and say who they're voting for, and then the new Congress meets on January 6th and certifies those results. Now, I spoke to a constitutional law professor, Ned Foley, at the Ohio State University, and he was very, very patient with me and walked me through how all of this works. And he explained a scenario that could be pretty troubling in a very close election. Basically, what could happen is the state's a battleground state, take a battleground state, that state tallies up the votes and declares candidate X the winner of that state. But candidate Y says, wait a second, there were some suspicious mail-in ballots. I don't really believe that this is right. That candidate could go to the state legislature and try to appeal to them and get them to award electors differently. So you could have two competing results coming from a state. Now, this happened in 1876, and spoiler alert, Rutherford B. Hayes ended up winning that election because you had conflicting results from 3 different states. It had to go to Congress. Congress had to come up with a commission that involved a lot of different people. They went through a whole process and determined Hayes the winner. So basically, constitutional law professors are telling us that everybody involved will want a decisive election so as not to have to go through these kind of nightmarish and chaotic scenarios, but those could be kind of scenarios that we could deal with. Now, candidates can certainly challenge results in the states, and both campaigns have big, expansive legal teams designed to do just that if it is in fact warranted.
So let's talk about that a little bit more, Alayna. We know that the Biden campaign has staffed up with multiple lawyers. What about the Trump campaign's preparations for a close election fight?
Well, Elaine, I think there's no secret that the president and his campaign expects some sort of legal battle. I think that's why the president was very careful, or as many people say, not careful with his words yesterday when asked whether there would be or whether he would commit to a peaceful transfer of power. So by all means, yes, the Trump campaign has staffed up with their legal team. They are preparing for some sort of a potential legal battle after the election. I think from most people I speak with on the Trump campaign and Republicans more broadly, they believe that on November 3rd, just given the nature of the way Democrats and Republicans vote, they think that the president will probably have more votes on November 3rd, or at least comparatively, between a mail-in ballot versus going into the election polling site on November 3rd. It takes longer for mail-in ballots sometimes to be counted. That's when Vice President Biden could get more votes, and this is kind of the scenario that they're gaming out. So if that does happen, that's when it gets really tricky, and I think that's exactly the scenario that his team is planning for, and that's what why they're staffing up in some part on the Trump campaign with their legal advisors.
I mean, listening to all of this, Ed, Caitlin used the word nightmarish to describe some of these potential scenarios, which seem extremely complex, frankly, and for American voters, I imagine, would cause a great deal of confusion if it ever got to that point. So let me ask you specifically about the Biden camp and the legal team. What exactly are they doing to try to prepare for the election and the days, possibly weeks afterwards?
Yeah, they also have hundreds of lawyers at their disposal ready to go if need be in the various states. The idea being that you have them at the ready in the various states that could have potential legal issues, and then have another team that can swoop in from here in Washington to help out. Bob Bauer, the former White House general counsel, guys like Mark Elias, a very popular and busy Democratic elections lawyer these days. He and his team at Perkins Coie here in D.C. would be involved in any kind of legal challenges if need be. But they understand that there is a complex myriad of potential scenarios, potential delays, potential issues with not only mail-in ballots, but lines not being held open for people who may get stuck in them on Election Day, other issues of concern regarding instructions that go out, the rules on, when a ballot can be counted once it's returned if it doesn't get back by Election Day, all those things continuing right now. And that's the other thing to keep in mind, is that it's not just about what happens on and after Election Day. A lot of it is about what's going on right now in the courts. You go to Pennsylvania, Ohio, South Carolina, Texas, places like that. There are legal challenges ongoing. And both campaigns, the national parties, the state parties, and other entities are all involved in sorting that out right now. So look, Americans just this year got to do their homework, got to make sure that however you're voting, you're following the instructions closely. If you decide to go vote on Election Day, double check on where exactly you can do that from, because your local normal polling site may not be open due to COVID restrictions, and then just pack your patience. And I think the best thing they can do, Elaine, is just tune in to CBSN and CBS News on election night, and we'll walk you through it as long as it takes. If it means we have to cancel Wednesday and Thursday prime time, we will. We'll figure it out. But, just like everything else this year, it's going to be a little different, require a little more patience and a little more explanation.
No, it's a really good point, because we
How's
have
that for a shameless plug?
On the various it's great, but, in all truth, I mean, we have spent a great deal of reporting on CBSN and on the network side trying to do just that, walk voters through the logistics of how various states are trying to get this done, whether it be taking them inside and behind the scenes where folks are trying to set up equipment to deal with all of this, showing exactly what it means to have the proper kind of envelope placed in an envelope for your ballot to actually count. There is a great deal of reporting, so shameless plug, but a very true plug. Meantime, Alayna, this morning Senate Judiciary Chair Lindsey Graham told Fox News he's looking at a timeline of 10 to 12 days between President Trump's Supreme Court nomination this Saturday and the start of hearings. Here's the president explaining last night why he wants to get a confirmation before the election. Let's listen.
I think it's very important. I think this will end up in the Supreme Court, and I think it's very important that we have 9 justices. But I think it's better if you go before the election, because I think this scam that the Democrats are pulling, it's a scam. This scam will be before the United States Supreme Court, and I think having a 4-4 situation is not a good situation. If you get that, I don't know that you'd get that. I think it should be 8-0 or 9-0.
So, Alayna, the Supreme Court is currently sitting at a 5-3 conservative majority. How much more advantageous is it for Republicans to make that 6-3 before the election?
Well, it's very advantageous. I think if you look at historical precedent or any time you look at a Supreme Court fight, Justice Brett Kavanaugh and his Supreme Court fight, the most recent ahead of the midterm elections, it's a massive base igniter. I think Republicans across the board are looking at this as a lightning rod to turn out the Republican base, turn out voters who are maybe unsure of who they want to vote for, but care more about social issues ahead of November. And so massive incentive. And everyone I've spoken with who are Republicans, I mean, I think, granted, there are some people on the Senate side, like Senator Susan Collins, who might be a little bit worried about what this means for her seat. But by and large, they think that they want to get this done before the November 3rd election. The president says he thinks it's in their best interest. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says it's in their best interest. Senator Lindsey Graham, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, says it's in their best interest. So basically everyone's on board here, and it does look like they have the votes and that this is a train that is not stopping. So I think another example of everything we were just looking at between voting and what happens there, another big argument that they're saying is about we want a Supreme Court that, there's no shot of it being a 4-4 decision if it comes down to it after the election. I think that's a little bit of an overblown theory that we shouldn't worry about just yet, but it is something that they're arguing, and key in Republicans' kind of, argument for people to get out and support whatever the Supreme Court nominee might be.
Well, Ed, it's been a relatively quiet day for Joe Biden. I hear that a lid was called on his day at 9:20 a.m. A lid signals to reporters and photographers no other public events for the rest of the day. But here's his response last night when he gave some of his first comments about top Supreme Court contender Amy Coney Barrett.
Don't know her. I just know what is reported in the press. And I think we should focus on what this is going to mean for health care, what it's going to mean for, once again, being able to say if you're pregnant, it's a pre-existing condition, be able to charge women more for the same procedure as men. It's wrong. It's an abuse of power. But I'll have more to talk about that.
So, Ed, I'm not sure if you were able to hear. He said, I don't know much about her, but I think we should focus on what this means for health care, et cetera. But why isn't Joe Biden engaging more, Ed, in this Supreme Court fight?
Because they believe that, at least in the short term, it's a winner for the president. The whole goal of the Biden campaign is to knock the president off of the preferred turf and talking points that he would like the nation, the news media, to be focused on. Most of the summer, Biden has been able to successfully prosecute the case that the president is failing to deal with COVID, failing to rebuild the economy, and failing in general as president. Supreme Court comes along, the vacancy, and it re-energizes the Republican base potentially. Although I still think it's too soon to measure that. We'll see. There's been some polling and obviously fundraising signals that there is interest in this, but allows them to sort of go out now and say to their supporters, look, we did it again. Promises made, promises kept. We're going to give you a third Supreme Court justice, re-elect us, and we can keep doing it, re-elect our Senate candidates, and that assures that we can continue doing this with no problem. And that takes the entire campaign off of the focus on coronavirus and the economic downturn and the racial strife across the country. So Biden, not as eager to talk about it. I think the other thing that Biden knows is, having been chairman of the Judiciary Committee, knowing Senate procedure, knowing the way the rules are written right now, he may not say this publicly, but I think he knows that the cake is baked on this. There are enough votes. They're going to do it. Just a question of when, before the election or after the election. But you'll see him and his team continue to talk about the issues, not the person, not the procedure, but what is at stake if there is a sixth conservative justice on the court. Future health care, future of abortion rights, civil rights, climate change, things like that. And that is where Democrats believe it can re-motivate, re-energize that base that turned out for them 2 years ago in those suburban swing districts, and potentially now can vote for Joe Biden as well. Real quick on the lid, the so-called lid, the idea that the campaign isn't going to be out publicly during the day today. He's been doing this a lot. A lot of it, of course, is driven by the fact that he's not campaigning every day because of the coronavirus restrictions across the country. Doesn't mean he's not doing things. And he made clear yesterday that today was the beginning of his formal debate preparations, that he would be meeting with his team to start going through the paces. We don't know whether that involves murder boards or somebody playing the president, but he said that his formal preparations would begin today. So that would be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday potentially, ahead of Tuesday, 6 days potentially. Possibly he'll pop out to do some kind of an event between now and Tuesday, but it gives you a sense that they are preparing him in a more formal, studied way, unlike the president, who has said that he doesn't need any practice.
Right. Murder boards, for people who don't know, essentially simulations of a debate, or if you are a nominee up for confirmation. Similar, yes. I don't want people to go, what is the murder board? All right. My thanks to all my panelists. Caitlin Huey-Burns. We will talk to you again after the break. And Ed O'Keefe and Alayna Treene, thank you very much.